Hello dear friends, today in Washington it is still June 14, Saturday and a deep night. You, my dear viewers, most of you, this video will be on Sunday, I hope in the morning. We have dramatic events here, so I decided to make this extra issue at this untimely hour. The thing is that Israel is in a dramatic situation in the military actions against Iran. If you remember in the previous video announcing the beginning of Israel's military operations against Iran, I told you the idea that such actions should be taken by the country of Israel in a case when it is almost completely sure that it will be possible to achieve its goal, that is, to destroy these nuclear reactors. Because if this goal is not achieved, the enemy will take emergency measures. And as the experts themselves believe, in such a situation it may take several days to get the required amount of enriched uranium. To a certain extent for the production of nuclear weapons. The Israelis knew, I told you about this in the previous video, that to achieve this goal, they need to first of all bomb the uranium enrichment reactor, which is located in a place or in the location of Ford in the mountains, they say, at a depth of about 60 meters, and in order to destroy it there, two things are needed. The GBU-57 MOP bomb, which only the Americans have and no one else has. Plus, not every plane can carry it, and those that are now in operation are D2 or B2. And this is what the Israelis needed. Without this, as it turned out, they could not do without it. And it turned out that they undertook this operation, began military actions against Iran, having neither one nor the other. And even not having a firm promise from the United States to help in this matter. You see, against the background of the brilliant operation that the Israeli army is still conducting, miracles are happening, so to speak, on a historical scale, on the verge of fantasy, which even in the movies sometimes seem incredible. Suddenly, such a sudden, I can't call it a flatness, on the other hand, I can't even express an understanding or a guess how it happened. Well, now I'll tell you about it. I will refer to one person, his name is Barak Ravid. This is a journalist who is here in Washington, and he has a colossal connection both in the government of the United States of America and in Israel. As I understand it, he is Israeli, a citizen of Israel. Here he works for Axios. He works in Israel on one of the largest information and internet networks. In my opinion, it's called Wally. I can pronounce it incorrectly, I don't speak Hebrew, and at the beginning of the Israeli operation against Iran he was. The source of the most important insights, both from Israel and from the United States of America. That is, perhaps the most knowledgeable person among those who can speak publicly about the relevant issue. And before me there are several articles, I will comment on them in detail now. They are written brilliantly as an analytical investigative document. And you will understand how this extraordinary situation has grown. So 14 hours ago, Mr. Barak Ravid published an article under the name of Axios, Dramatic. The mission of Israel depends on the destruction of the most difficult nuclear target of Iran. That is, 14 hours ago it became clear in Israel that victory is not in the hands, and that the situation is 50-50. You will destroy this most difficult nuclear target of Iran. You will not destroy this critical situation. This is what the analyst writes. One of the factors that can determine whether Israel's bold strike on Iran will be a bold success or a dangerous mistake is the fate of the Iranian factory to enrich Iran and Ford. Israel will need either an unprecedented, incredible tactical inventiveness or the help of the United States to destroy Ford, which is built into the mountains and is deep underground. But if the object remains untouched and accessible, the nuclear program that Israel has decided to liquidate can actually accelerate. This is what I told you in the previous video. In other words, an angry, fanatic enemy can make every effort to force the production. The Israelis themselves said, some of them the officials, that for this he may need only a few days, well, a week, well, maybe 2 weeks, although they spoke in different ways. In the most indefinite way, he spoke somewhere else. How strange it is. From his statements, it was not clear at all, personally to me, what Sir Borf was talking about, why such a need arose now. Other representatives spoke more specifically, more dramatically. Well, this is what he can do to move forward in this Ford to the necessary conditions, this uranium. But we are dealing with, as now, recently, Congressman Lawler, a Republican and a member of the influential Committee on the Affairs of the Armed Forces of the House of Representatives. He said that in this matter now it is not Israel against Iran. It is, as if by our words, as if by the light forces, the forces of the light of democracy. He called it the unholy alliance, that is, the alliance of the unholy force or the axis of evil. And he called it Iran, Russia, China. Well, he did not continue to list all this further, North Korea and so on. That is, in this situation, he can turn to the same Russia, which has a very large experience in helping Iran in the creation of nuclear weapons, including the improvement of the process of enriching uranium. This has been going on for a very long time, from the very first years of Putin's presence as president of the Russian Federation. And then, who knows that North Korea, will it refuse to quickly put in its friends, its strategic allies, a suitcase of enriched uranium? In short, the situation is really dramatic, and then the analyst writes, the whole operation really must be completed, the liquidation of Ford is obligatory, nothing else is given. This was stated by the Israeli ambassador to the United States later in an interview with Fox News. Therefore, the Israeli government hopes that the Trump administration will finally make a decision to join the operation of Israel. Therefore, it should be noted that the United States did not join, as I told you. This is such a muddy situation. The Israelis ran for the representative of the administration, persuaded, convinced. That is, they knew that something was being prepared. But the concrete help in this matter was not provided, and they did not promise. And the Israelis do not know whether such a dramatic situation really happened with the readiness of a nuclear bomb in Iran. Whether they hoped, I don't know, it is necessary now and that's it. And there in the process we will convince. They decided maybe to involve the Americans, Trump, already in the process of military actions. Well, so far it turns out that this business does not work at all. Israel does not have huge bombs for the destruction of bunkers necessary to destroy this object and strategic bombers for their achievements. The United States has both and in the zone of reach at a distance of reach to Israel. If I am not mistaken, the last time the B-2 was seen in Great Britain. This, in my opinion, is the only base in Europe where they sit down from time to time. The Israeli official told the analyst that the United States can still, that is, the Israelis hope that the United States can still join the operation. And that President Trump even hinted at this in a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu a few days before the start of the operation. However, the White House representatives immediately checked this information, telling the analyst that Trump said the opposite. I will tell you, gentlemen, if you take Netanyahu like this, at least watching what they say and how they do, Trump and Netanyahu. I don't know, personally I would not bet 100% on the words of neither one nor the other. But it is clear that the promise of the Americans to help and generally take part in this operation was not and still is not. On the contrary, the administration of the United States has still taken the position in every possible way, ignoring the real participation in this operation. Although the Iranians do not believe, they say that the United States and Israel are connecting the decades of close American cooperation, intelligence, satellite images, all this is true. But as for the specific information of this operation, it turns out not. Nevertheless, the Israeli officials believe that there is hope. And the American officials, I will remind you, it was 14 hours before the release of this issue. The American officials said that the United States did not intend to participate in the operation directly. Maybe someone will say so directly, or maybe not directly. A bomb strike will definitely testify to the participation of the United States. Because the Americans will not give the Israeli pilots the confidence to carry out this operation. If the bomb is dropped, it will not just be dropped by an American bomb, by an American bomber, but also by an American pilot. Some experts believe that Israel may try to repeat the effect of a massive blow to the bunkers, repeatedly bombing the same place. Well, you know, it's in one place. They have GBU-28, if I'm not mistaken. Its penetration depth is about 20 times less. I don't know how many of them are needed to do this. There is another more risky approach, as the analyst writes. It would be sending a special force for a raid to the object, but this is almost from a movie, like James Bond. But the Israeli special forces have already conducted such a raid. It was in September last year on a smaller scale. The thing was in Syria when the Israelis destroyed an underground rocket plant, setting up and blowing up explosives there. The whole operation took 2 hours. Well, the operation was much smaller in Syria. There was no depth of decay and the screen was wrong. Well, these are the options. It was 14 hours ago. So after that, the Israelis at all levels here in Washington were building representatives of the administration who had a different headache. There were demonstrations of protest against the slogans, "No Kings," all over the country today. But the posters, which were carried by many of these demonstrators, said that there was no fascism, that Trump is a fascist, and that's it. It would be fine if it was only in the well-known democratic states, but the thing had already reached Houston, Texas. This is Makrova, the Republican Party's bright red colors. This is Farpost. This is a plot, the Republican Party. And suddenly there was a thunder in the middle of the clear sky. As they say, there were about 2,000 of them all over the country. I don't know how many, but all over the country they rolled. First, well, Trump also organized a parade today. The day before, the most famous, maybe very respected, four-star general, former commander of the United NATO troops in Europe, Wesley Clark said, "We don't need these parades. It's not in our blood, it's not in our character, it's not in the nature of our armed forces, it's alien. But they went to this parade, it would be better if he wasn't there." I looked at him for about 20 minutes. It was a deafening sight, a half-empty tribune, people who sat there with boring physiognomies. Trump himself produced a completely comical impression. Another more comical character was sitting next to him. Minister of Defense Hexit. The military men, they walked along the avenue like a walk on the beach. That is, they didn't walk, they didn't march, they didn't even walk, they shaved. The people who drove tanks, battle vehicles, infantry, instead of giving honor. Very rarely, the rest were made by Uncle Rudchik. That is, somewhere it reminded me of the wedding in Malinovka. And the parade of Gritsin Tavrichikov, who would receive Papadopoulos. Well, somewhere it was like that. It was written seriously. It looked like all this. Well, and then the Israelis run and shout, "Save," and this is in response to them. "We explained to you, you did not listen, you started it. And now we have to go to you for a meeting, putting ourselves at risk." And there really is a risk because Iran said does not believe that the United States is not covered in this matter. And promised to strike on military objects of all those countries that are involved in this matter, as they believe. Well, that is, they can do a lot of filth. There is still Cusido, there is the Marmot Strait, and there are several 100,000 Americans in one Israel. That is, this is the last thing Trump needs personally now. Although analysts are now writing that in this whole situation, if someone is to blame, then it is Trump. He came out of this international agreement in 2000. Wait a minute, some years flew out of my head. In short, he broke this international agreement which allowed to control this program one way or another. The UN International Agency for Atomic Energy then had access to the objects. Although there was no idea what was going on there, he came out, and since then it has not been possible to go back. But he had this idea, that is, Israel struck a strong, crushing blow. And he began to write, "I was negotiating with you. I convinced the Iranians that it was necessary to conclude the agreement. Let's quickly conclude the agreement with me, otherwise there will be something terrible." What could be terrible? That is, the United States cannot do anything. Israel will not strike for the United States. In short, he was bluffing, and Iran realized that it was a bluff. Thus, 12 hours, 2 hours ago, the following message appears today. Axios of the same analyst. Israel calls on the United States to join the war with Iran to liquidate the nuclear program. According to two Israeli officials, during the last 48 hours, Israel appealed to the Trump administration with a request to join the war with Iran in order to liquidate its nuclear program. This is a cry of despair. Israel started this operation at 48 o'clock and immediately began to ask for help. It turns out that he began without having the strength and means to bring it to an end. It has, theoretically, I would say, to send a bunch of bombs there one after another, or a special task force, but this is so. This is from the series of films about James Bond. Well, then again, Israel does not have bombs, does not have bombers, the United States has them, and they are here. It is possible to do all this quickly. However, the Trump administration has still been distanced. This is in the state of 2 hours before this moment, as I am now recording it. The Trump administration has still been distanced from the operation of Israel and has confirmed that the counterattacks of Iran against American targets will be illegal. This is what Trump is most concerned about now. He is now persuading Iran, we have nothing to do with this, for God's sake, do not strike at our goals, because if you strike at our goals, it will be, you see, illegal. Well, you remember, right, Taco, you know such a yellow birdie. A direct attack on Iran, writes Mr. Ravid, even if the participation of the United States is limited by the bombing of one object, it will actually drag the United States into war. However, if after the operation Ford will remain in working condition, Israel will not achieve its goals, that is, the liquidation of the Iran nuclear program. The Israeli official said, Axios, that the United States could join the operation and that Trump even hinted at this in a recent conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. However, the White House immediately checked this information. The second American official today confirmed that Israel called on the Trump administration to join, that is, called on to join, that is. The United States still had no relationship with this operation, it turns out. But this American official said that at the moment the administration does not consider such an option. The White House official said on Saturday that everything that will happen today, it is necessary to assume that something else can happen, which we do not know yet. It cannot be prevented, he means the attack of Israel. But he believes that we have the opportunity to agree on a successful, peaceful settlement of this conflict if Iran is ready. For this, Iran must abandon its nuclear program. Israeli officials raised the issue of the United States' participation in the liquidation of the Fords with American colleagues from the moment the operation of Israel began. That is, these are some miracles for me. That is, before that, they did not even ask the United States, they did not even agree. How can this be explained? For me, it is a mystery. The only thing that is, something was that made Netanyahu immediately not giving in to this necessary promise. To the United States still start the operation, and the only thing that comes to my mind is that since when it all started, there was a message that Knesset stopped the consideration of the issue of the liquidation of Netanyahu, of his position, of his post as prime minister, and then he has an investigation. Criminal cases are hanging as far as I understand, although I have never dealt with this case in depth. But the operation began and it stopped the development of this issue. Did it really make Netanyahu hurry up with this case and get involved? In this war, without having the guarantee that he could reach a victory with it, I do not know, but probably the Israeli sources will comment on it. They will write. There will probably be clarity in this issue. The Israeli source today also reported that the United States is still considering this request and emphasized that Israel hopes that Trump will agree. Well, Trump, I would say, what did he do today? What did he have a headache about? In addition, today Trump had another birthday, and he gladly received a call from his great friend Putin. According to this, there was corresponding information, the meaning of which is that Putin is imposing his efforts on Trump. to regulate the war between Israel and Iran, the person who is accused of committing military crimes or crimes against humanity. He wants to regulate the issue of war. Trump received this call in the morning and then reported that he had. A telephone conversation with Putin in the morning on Saturday. Putin called to congratulate me very kindly on my birthday, but more importantly, to talk about Iran, a country that he knows very well. Well, he just knows well. A strategic ally, she supplies him with the weapons he shoots at Ukrainian civilian objects. He, that is, Putin, continues. Trump believes, like me, that the war between Israel and Iran should end. What did I answer him? That his war should also end, i.e. the war between Russia and Ukraine. This Trump wrote on his account through social. What did Putin answer him about this? He does not report. But then it is said that nuclear negotiations were scheduled for Sunday, and they were to take place in Oman. However, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Oman reported that there will be no negotiations. Nevertheless, the representative of the United States confirmed that there will be no negotiations on Sunday. But we are still committed to negotiations and hope that Iranians will soon return to this matter, to these negotiations. Iranians, by and large, are qualified to return to these negotiations, and Iranians love to do everything qualified. They need people, that is, they are seriously related to the negotiations. They dial their shaltai baltai, as some sometimes do, and they did. And it turned out, as a result of the military actions of Israel in the last 2 days, a difficult situation, since the chief nuclear physicist who headed the work on the enrichment of uranium was killed. And now there are no qualified representatives of Iran to continue negotiations, at least only because of this, but the main thing is different. The main thing is that the Iranians believe that the United States is involved in the organization of this blow, and therefore at first they categorically refused to resume negotiations with the Americans. Well, then the White House is worried about escalation. The White House, that is, the Israelis are trying to kill Trump's administration to help to join this war. At the same time, the White House is watching over the Iranians, trying to convince them to return to the table of negotiations. As the White House representative said, we have the opportunity to agree on a successful peaceful settlement of this conflict. The fastest way to peace for Iran is to refuse to create nuclear weapons. Further, the article reports that during the previous telephone conversation with Trump, Putin offered Trump help in negotiations on the nuclear program between the United States and Iran. Trump had talks with Netanyahu. Putin also had talks with Netanyahu, and then he talked with President Iran Pezeshkian. As the American press writes, Putin said to Netanyahu and Pezeshkian that he is ready to act as an intermediary between the parties to prevent further escalation of tensions. The Kremlin has already reported on this. And then the situation arises, well, just a farce, and I mean, who is Putin? What country does he represent? Which has been committing military crimes for 3 years, as a result of which more than 1 million people have died, if we take everything. A tremendous damage has been inflicted on Ukraine, much more than the damage has been inflicted on Iran so far, and it may be counted as the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why, by the way, I don't remember if I said it or not, Nikki Haley, when the first time the information that Putin was offering her words sounded, she wrote that Iran is an ally, the closest ally of Putin's military criminal. They are at the same time Then, with the same opinion, I spoke to the representatives of the Committee on Foreign Affairs in the Armed Forces of the Chamber of Representatives. Of course, the final conclusion was that American people cannot agree on this, but on such a completely insane option. Trump spoke on Saturday with Turkish President Erdogan about the war. Erdogan said, "I told Trump that it is necessary to prevent uncontrollable escalation in the region." Well, everyone believes that this should be done, except, of course, the representatives of Tel Aviv and Tehran. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Iraqi, said on Saturday, Kallas, the main diplomat of the European Union, that Iran will not continue negotiations with the United States of America until the Israeli attacks on Iran continue. That is, he took a step back. At first, they said 14 hours ago, in general, under no circumstances will they return to negotiations with the Americans because the Americans are involved in this blow now. They can still agree, but for this, first Iraq, first the Israelis must stop their attacks on Iran. Well, then they apparently I don't. No, either felt that they had some additional scourges, I mean the Iranians. They did not say that they could still go after they finished their strike of revenge on Israel. That is, they no longer ask the question that Israel will stop their strikes. That is, they will finish their strikes of revenge on Israel, and then they can return. That is, Iran took 2 steps back, and it seems that the prospect is vague so far, but it is being drawn out somewhere. Putin told Trump that Russia is ready to continue direct negotiations with Ukraine after June 22. Well, Trump asked Putin to put an end to the war in Ukraine. This is the situation on this issue. The situation is really dramatic. Strikes are being made on one side, on the other. Of course, Israelis have achieved tremendous success. They conquered the sovereignty in the air from Tehran and further west to the borders of Iran. This means that the Russian air defense system, anti-missile defense, which was set up in Iran, people who were trained there, perhaps. There are still Russian advisors and specialists. In fact, this defense system is blown to smithereens. It speaks of quality. Once again, it speaks of the quality of the so-called Second World Army. Another colossal thing that amazed me is that freedom, but relatively freedom in a nutshell, the scope that has taken place, the sabotage. Activity of the Mossad on the territory of Iran. This is colossal. There, the first hours when the strike began on the territory of Iran, at least 200 Mossad operatives and an innumerable number of agencies acted, because all these manipulations with drones, with launches, and so on. It was as if they were writing from one sheet. What Ukraine did a few years ago when it delivered strikes on the military airfields of Russia on peaceful so-called bombers. 1-to-1, but the Israelis had a much larger scale. This is a sign of the colossal success of their recruiting work. Because it was mainly the local Iranians who worked on the Mossad in the conditions of mortal danger, perfectly understanding that if they were caught, they would be killed, and an inevitable death would await. And nevertheless, people are coming, and I think that the main thing that moves them is the idea, this ideological basis, which says that the situation inside Iran is very rotten. That is, the state is not monolithic, and it will be very, very difficult for it to withstand a long struggle. On the other hand, when the military actions began, Harold King, he is the founder and, so to speak, the spiritual father of the Institute for the Study of War in Washington, he said that Iran has no less than 2,000 ballistic missiles that it can use against Israel. That is, this matter can continue for a very long time. The sides can fight for a very long time. Now you can hear the voices from Tel Aviv basically that it can take several days and maybe a week. Well, in general, this is the situation. We are waiting, watching, observing. Personally, I think that it is difficult for me to imagine that Trump will agree to hold on for so long after all this. And now it all splashed out, and all this is already known. It is already clear that if there is a blow, it means that the Americans, and this means that in the Middle East, the American bases are under attack. In Israel itself, the citizens of the United States are under attack. This will be the end. This will be the end of Trump's presidency, given that he is already here, already in the territory of the United States. Very, very uncomfortable. A difficult situation. I'm done. The last two questions on public opinion, which I read this morning as a result. One shows the general attitude of the people of the United States towards Trump. One question shows, that is, the number of those who do not love Trump is 11% more than those who love him. The other minus 16%. That is, analysts say that there was no such thing. Well, they don't remember this. They don't remember. After the Second World War, there was no president with such monstrous negative ratings. And the situation continues to develop. It goes further. At this time, there are some positive developments in the context of defense of Ukraine. Well, first of all, I must say that Trump, from everything that I told you today, maybe you noticed there is something positive. This is what he said when Putin told him that it was necessary to end the war between Israel and Iran. Trump told him, and you too must end your war, and Putin told him that we will continue the negotiations on the 22nd. This is good. Then Trump tied this matter, because, well, for Russia, the situation is also not important. If Iran is defeated, it will mean the loss of the most important, vital ally for Russia in all directions. Therefore, suddenly with the attack of Israel against Iran, a means of pressure on the Kremlin arose in order to force it to stop the aggression against Ukraine. Well, there are also some more positive developments that I will briefly tell you about. The events happened some time ago, but everything interfered with its importance, so to speak. We are talking about the background of the attack of Israel against Iran, but there was such an event last week. The new chief commander of NATO in Europe is appointed, General Alexis Grinkovich. This is the current commander of the 9th Air Fleet of the United States of America. He served in the Central Command, had a network, had experience in planning operations, as they say, in the conditions of a limited mandate. That is, when he is put up like this. He is trying to put it in a solid frame and set very ambitious goals there. That is, this is a master, as in the conditions of pressure, to achieve what is considered necessary. It is believed that this is a very, very positive appointment for Ukraine. Well, first of all, the appointment signals that the American general remains the commander of the United Armed Forces of NATO in Europe, and this means that the United States remains in Europe despite all the talks. A few weeks ago, the Europeans were already considering Which of them would command these troops, because it was believed that the Americans would definitely withdraw troops. Now it turns out they do not withdraw. We have a planning horizon of at least 4 years. This is a very positive phenomenon. Then, the second meaning of his appointment is that the support of Ukraine will remain in the strategic focus of NATO. One of the most important issues of NATO is the support of Ukraine, despite the possible destabilization in the White House. That is, there is a constant undercover struggle in the White House. But as the aristocrats, one way or another in the end, I think they will have to give up, and very seriously. An interesting detail, Grinkovich is a supporter of the application of artificial intelligence to investigate the assessment of the theaters of military actions. This is exactly what I told you about recently, and what manifested itself in the Ukrainian operations, in particular, the strike on the Russian airfields, and what Israel has done now, launching its drones from the territory of Iran. This is the first, so to speak, of a new war, a new theory of the war. Of 1921 and practice, that is, it enhances his attention to artificial intelligence. He is the patron of this business. He enhances the influence of those companies that are now working with Ukraine in this area, and their influence is enhanced within NATO, which means it is good. It will be very good for Ukraine. Then, the following positive. NATO is developing new instruments of surveillance, a collection of intelligence information on the eastern flank. The satellite and signal intelligence information is expanding. This is the so-called SIGINT, signal intelligence, electronic intelligence, and the image is the images that the satellites make. In this case, there is a certain important political text. NATO is actually beginning to duplicate critically important channels in the field of electronic intelligence and image intelligence, overlapping what the Americans are doing now. This is done in a case when, if the Americans turn, there will already be a parallel backup option within NATO, and Ukraine and the Soviet Union will have access to this information. This is colossal. One of the most vulnerable points was for Ukraine, the most undesirable case if the situation in the White House goes in the worst way, and the Americans will stop delivering intelligence. That is, there is a preparation of a scenario of unification or unification of the West, when the West, now they say the West as a single whole, practically no longer exists. The United States is in the process of split. Therefore, a new pole is being formed in this West. This is the European Union, in general Europe, and it will rely on the consortium of allies, countries of allies, as well as private contractors, such as the companies that Ukraine is currently working with in the field of artificial intelligence. Well, a strategic signal from Germany, the decision on the long-term supply of Iris-T. There, in my opinion, is a 3-year horizon for this matter. Partially it will be planned, partially it will be financed through the European World Fund. This is a colossal value, the strengthening of the PMO system for Ukraine. It does not take long to explain, but as for Germany, Germany strengthens its status as the key anchor of European defense in Ukraine, in case the United States and its efforts in this area will be turned down. Thus, now a so-called strategic triangle of stability is being formed the stability of Ukraine. This is Berlin, Brussels, NATO intelligence society, complemented by the long-term part of the private defense coalition. And about this coalition now, as is considered within NATO, there are such companies as Palantir, Anduril, Airbus Defense, companies that are very friendly in relation to Ukraine. The United States still does not care what Trump is doing there, but in all these events, the United States still remains or acts as the ridge of that architecture that is being built or trying to preserve in the Europeans. But the European allies are preparing a safety pillow in the event of a complete political storm in Washington. That's all, dear friends. Allow me to finish this video. As always, glory to Ukraine by the armed forces. The enemy will be defeated, the victory will be ours. To you, dear friends, endurance, courage, and firm faith in our inevitable victory. See you soon.